So I'll get that going and we'll make a start. So thank you, everybody.
Can I share my screen already, or you tell me when?
Yeah, you can share your screen. But I'll just introduce, so I'm really pleased to have CLT Brussels, you put it the other way around. CLT Brussels here today, Verena and Arthur talking about the work that they've been doing in Belgium. Just explaining that this was the first CLT in Europe, I think, but we'll hear more. And it's just really great to have an international perspective to this whole thing, particularly as we're starting to develop more CLTs over here. So over to you, Verena. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, thank you very much, Paul, for this invitation, for involving us in this festival. We do hope our contribution will bring some interesting elements to your debates and your talks. So let me start with a few elements concerning a little bit the context where the community land trust was established. We are talking about a housing question, a severe housing question that basically goes back to the beginning of the industrialization in Belgium. So let's say it was never properly solved through the years, and this led to the point where today half of the population has the conditions to have access to social housing, but only the 7.7% of the housing stock is social housing. So as you can see, there is a huge gap between the demand and what is actually available. So in these conditions, the Community Land Trust was established in 2012 as an organization providing housing, especially to low-income households. And this was the result of a long process of struggles and explorations, which in fact brought a few community-based organizations to discover the model of the Community Land Trust in the US. And to actually develop the feasibility study in order to understand if the model was actually possible. It was possible to realize the same model in Europe. And as I was saying very quickly, but then we can maybe go back to this in the discussion, the main challenge was really the legal aspects related to realizing this model, let's say from a common law system to a civil law system in Europe. So we would like to share with you now a video that I hope it will to work in order to understand what are the specific characteristics of this model in terms of ownership, in terms of property, but also in terms of governance, because as you very well know, there are variations among the different community land trusts across the world. So we would like really to make sure we explain what are the specificities of the Belgian system.
Découvre rapidement deux réalités. Un déficit important de logements sociaux et un doublement des prix du logement entre 2000 et 2010. Il reste alors pour ces familles deux possibilités. Vivre dans un petit logement insalubre et cher ou quitter Bruxelles. Comment répondre à cette crise du logement et comment éviter que les prix continuent à monter? Plusieurs associations bruxelloises ont réfléchi à cette question et ont découvert aux États-Unis un système qui pourrait donner une réponse. Les Community Land Trust. Le principe de base des CLT est que le sol doit être utilisé pour répondre aux besoins des habitants et non pas comme un bien spéculatif. Un CLT est une association sans but lucratif qui acquiert, possède et gère des terrains et des bâtiments pour les rendre accessibles aux revenus les plus bas. Le principe du CLT est l'acquisition mixte. Le CLT acquiert des terrains grâce à des subsides. Il reste propriétaire du terrain et il vend les logements construits sur ce terrain à des particuliers. Comme la valeur du sol n'est plus prise en compte dans la valeur du bâtiment, le logement est alors moins cher. Pour garantir que le logement reste accessible pour des bas revenus, un propriétaire CLT qui veut vendre son logement doit le faire à un prix plafonné. Il pourra récupérer tout ce qu'il a investi et une partie de la plus-value. Tout le monde gagne à ce système. Le premier propriétaire a la possibilité de vivre tranquillement dans sa maison, de construire un petit capital et ses enfants peuvent hériter de la maison. En cas de revente, ce logement reste accessible pour d'autres familles sans qu'un nouveau subside soit nécessaire. Ce mécanisme permet d'éviter la spéculation immobilière et rendre accessibles les logements pour des faibles revenus, génération après génération. Selon ces mêmes principes, le CLT peut aussi développer des commerces de proximité, des entreprises d'économie sociale, des espaces culturels et communautaires. Toutes ces activités permettent de créer de l'emploi pour les habitants du quartier. Le CLT est une association de membres. Tous les propriétaires sont automatiquement membres et d'autres personnes intéressées peuvent le devenir. Il y a 3 types de membres et tous sont représentés dans le conseil d'administration. Les ménages qui sont propriétaires d'un logement, les riverains et la société civile, et les représentants des pouvoirs publics. Chaque groupe dispose d'un tiers du pouvoir de décision. Dans le CLT de Bruxelles, les familles qui veulent acheter un logement participent déjà bien avant qu'ils soient propriétaires. Ils deviennent membres du CLT, ils épargnent, ils définissent le projet architectural de leur futur logement, tout ça collectivement avec les autres futurs propriétaires. Le CLT est un modèle de responsabilité sociale partagée. Il s'engage à gérer la terre comme un bien commun, à ne jamais la restituer aux logiques du marché et garantir perpétuellement son usage social. Il permet à des ménages pauvres de devenir propriétaires de leur logement et de s'impliquer dans un projet participatif, solidaire et convivial. Le CLT Bruxelles partage tous ces principes. Depuis 2013, il est reconnu par la région bruxelloise et reçoit des subsides qui lui permettent de développer des projets partout dans la ville, ensemble avec les futurs habitants et des associations partenaires.
Okay, so as you have seen, and as we said, this is about providing homes, but this is only a part of the mission. The other part is building the community. And let's say in general, the idea is really that of providing a healthy and empowering living situation. So of course, this entails, let's say, the built assets, but it's also about the relationships that people are able to build within their neighborhood. So for this reason, for example, all the projects, all the community land trust projects that are realized always include some sort of facility that is actually open to the rest of the neighborhood. It can be a community care facility, a sport field, a cooperative supermarket, or a community garden. But the idea is really to fuel an exchange between a given project and the neighborhood in which the project is realized. As a matter of fact, let's say this relationship with the neighborhood and the making of the community is also something that is really, let's say, desired, and it's felt as something desirable by the very inhabitants, which are very often the initiators of a number of activities that are fueling the contact and the relationship with the neighborhood itself. So for example, in one of our projects, the inhabitants created the Bazaar Festival, which is a flea market organized once a month, and this really created a nice exchange with the local neighborhood. And it has to be said that these activities are most of the time initiated by the inhabitants, but they are also, especially in the beginning, supported by the community land trust, which also takes care of looking for funding opportunities and any kind of support that could really help the inhabitants to continue with their activities. But making the community is not only about, let's say, the morphology of the projects or the activities that are established by the inhabitants, is really also about becoming members. So the first thing individuals are supposed to do in order to become owners of a house within the community land trust is becoming member of the community land trust organization. And this comes with a number of rights and opportunities, but also comes with a number of obligations and duties. So just to give you an idea, for example, there is all the future inhabitants of these projects are supposed to take part to a compulsory information session where they will learn about the model of the community land trust, but they will also learn about, let's say, their cohabitation and what living together entails. There is a possibility for them to elect, actually they are called to elect the representatives of the inhabitants in the occasion of the annual general assemblies. And they are also involved in what we call the SHICC labs, which are basically workshops oriented, let's say, or workshops that have the purpose of allowing the inhabitants to express themselves concerning the design of their future homes and their shared spaces. But I'm going to tell a bit more about this in a minute, because in fact, let's say this design-based participatory approach is something really specific of the community land trust in Brussels. We know that at least, let's say, in other countries, this is not very much the approach. So the design, let's say, part is not really shared with the inhabitants. While this is more, let's say, it's really something that was important for the community land trust in Brussels from the very beginning. Because it was really in the DNA, in the history that led to the establishment of this moment. It's a moment that, as I was saying, allows the inhabitants to express themselves concerning their future homes and their cohabitation, but is also a moment of responsabilization, because it is through these training activities that they learn about for example, maintaining the building where they live, maintaining the common spaces, managing and organizing the activities for these common spaces, and so on. So the training really covers a number of different themes and topics. You can see them in this slide. It's about the building, also considering that in most of the cases, these are going to be energy efficient buildings. So there is really, it's really important to know how to maintain them in the long term. It's another topic, another important theme. It's about the shared spaces and how to maintain and how to govern these shared spaces and their activities. It's about the group, the specific group of inhabitants that will live in a given project, but it's also about the individual needs of every single inhabitant within the group. And of course, it's about the relationship with the neighborhood. So these are the 5 different, let's say, topics that are addressed by this design-based participatory process, and the training activities are normally developed in collaboration with the local organizations because of their expertise and support. And this, of course, is another way to make these projects really a community-based and community endeavors. So they are really the result of a community effort in general. So let's say through the years, what we learned, especially through the first prototype projects, however, is that these participatory processes are indeed emancipatory for the inhabitants, but the way they were performed in the beginning was really very demanding in terms of times. And that was really, in some cases, too much, both for the inhabitants and for the team. It was too much time to dedicate and too much effort And in some occasions, for example, the process could last even more than 2 years. So that was really too much for the inhabitants to follow. So the team started to think about another approach in order, on the one hand, to save this opportunity for the inhabitants to begin to know each other and to voice their needs, but also at the same time to learn about the responsibilities. And on the other hand, to make this process a little bit more efficient and also, let's say, able to respond to the upscaling of the community land trust as an organization through the time. And the result of this, let's say, reflection and reevaluation are what we call the Archie Labs, which are these punctual and dedicated training moments, let's say, that are really supposed to prepare the inhabitants to their future cohabitation and to know each other. So in this image, you can see a little bit the scheme of the process that is leading to the realization of every single project of the community land trust. In dark blue, you can see the specific moments where let's say a more intensive, let's say, participation of the inhabitants is demanded, is required, and this is where Archie Labs are organized and prepared. So it's no more along the whole process, but it's only in some specific moments of the process. So for example, at first, Archie Lab is organized in order to prepare the inhabitants to evaluate the projects that are submitted to respond to the public call for projects that is usually organized in order to select a studio and the architects that are going to realize the project. This is because the community land trust, as you heard, is publicly funded by the region of Brussels, and this is what requires a public call for projects at the moment of choosing an architect, a studio that is going to realize the project itself. A second moment, a second Archie Lab is organized in order to allow the inhabitants to directly interact with the architects once the project has been selected. So this gives the possibility really to go further in the specification of the needs and the requirements of the inhabitants concerning their future project, the project that they are going to inhabit. Then there is a moment in which the project is actually presented to the larger community. We have to say that, in fact, local organizations and the neighbors have been already involved in the selection process of the project that is going to be realized. So let's say some members of the local community already know the project, but of course there is a moment in which the project is more publicly shared with the rest of the community, also because it is now approaching its final, let's say, configuration, its final solution. So it's almost ready to be realized. This is just before the beginning of the works. And then as soon as the construction works will start, a specific group of inhabitants is finally composed, and this will allow the training activities to really address the specific needs of those inhabitants. So for example, if there are disabled people, what are their needs? If there are any other specific situation can finally be approached in the context of a specific group of inhabitants that is going to be inhabit the project under realization. Of course, this entails a number of site visits of these project groups that has the possibility to see how the works will evolve. And finally, the final moment is really the visit of the project once it has been finally realized. This will allow finally the inhabitants to appreciate the result of their efforts and their dedication before moving in. And now I'm leaving the floor to my colleague Arthur, that is going to explain a little bit a few of the projects that we realized and the European dimension of the community land trust activities in this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Verena. I'm going to try to share my screen as well. I've prepared a small PowerPoint. So, but I think you need to cancel your screen sharing first.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Okay.
Okay, thanks. Okay. So I'm going to go, illustrate what Verena explained through a bit of a concrete example. It was actually our first pilot project called Le Nid, which means the nest. The opportunity was located in 2010. So in 2010, the CLTB as it is didn't really exist yet, but there was a platform called the platform CLTB, which was created by several people working in associations that were accompanying people in bad housing situations, and were trying to together bring a new solution to provide housing for the poor inhabitants of Brussels. And it's that group that discovered the community land trust model and imported it in Brussels. Le Nid was hence a pilot project, which was financed by the region as such. It's interesting to note that this was a parish building which was renovated, which are two elements which permitted a much lower cost for the architectural operation. You can see on the left what it was and on the right what it became. As with the vast majority of our projects, there is a community space, and as with a lot of our projects, but I'm not sure each, there is a shared garden that you can see on the picture on the right, on the left-hand side of the picture that is on the right. You don't see the community space there, but you can see that the building is, it's nice and modern. It has those little suspended balconies, so it's also an element of pride to provide this kind of quality housing to people who have never imagined becoming homeowners, because we are selling the homes, we're making them homeowners. So this is Le Nid. It was also the Nid was as a pilot project, of course, it was an experiment. The 7 families were selected because they were known by the different services as people were in problematic housing situations. But now we have a waiting list. And the reason we have a waiting list is because it's just the most democratic way to provide housing, because it's a blind selection in a way. Huh? But we also have a system. Everybody on the waiting list is under social housing ceiling. But then within that list, we have a way of further putting them into income brackets. And why we do this is to make sure that we have people who are at very who are very poor, live in a more mixed housing, like not only poor people all together in like a ghetto of a building, but there's also people of a higher income bracket. And there is a system of compensation in the square meters that is given per subsidy, which allows us to offer the same size of housing to people who are in the poorest income as to people who are in the highest levels of income. For Le Nid, this I actually don't know if the system was already in place, but the families were selected previous to that. As Verena said, there were an enormous amount of meetings for them, but it was also tied to the fact that how to say, like the building, the legal aspects were very, very complicated. It was all very much a discovery process. And there were specificities to Le Nid that is not reproduced in other projects, such as the fact that they had to come together as a legal structure called a société civile, which is not something we do for others. So a big learning process. At the height of the meeting frenzy, there were a meeting every 2 weeks, who for working people with a lot of children is very demanding. But yeah, and it took 8 years. For the people who started first, it might have even taken 9 years, but there were some unlucky happenings with the building work, so it's also something that has to be kept in mind. But yeah, they moved in last year, And as far as I know, they're all very happy. I'd like to move on now to the project CALICO, and actually we have a small video for it in English. So if I manage to make the sound work, it would be pretty nice. I'll try to share it. It's going to be a bit more exciting than my monotonous speech. Okay. Can you hear?
We can't hear.
You cannot?
No.
That's a shame. Yeah, sorry. You can find the video online. I'll send the link maybe to Paul. Well, it's okay. That's a shame.
Maybe you can comment on the images, so you can leave the images and just comment.
Yeah, okay. Let's try to do that. So yeah, it might be a little bit weird, but the video yeah, could sound for me. The video explains that CALICO is an intergenerational housing. As you can see, there's old people with younger people living in the same building. This is there's actually a quota of people aged above a certain age that we have to have in the building. There's also a birth and an end of life facilities, which allows people to give birth. There is one facility for people to give birth and one place for people to pass away in a familiar deinstitutionalized environment, because in Belgium the euthanasia legislation is very integrated into medical practice. And this is the only place in the world where you have like a birthing house and an end of life house next to each other. There's also a community aspect. It's a very care focused project. It also has a gender perspective. There are 10 housing units for precarious women managed by a feminist association. It's a very, very wide-reaching project in the themes it tries to reach, and yeah, it's 34 housing units. Yeah, and the video is really, really nice. I recommend you watch it after the presentation. I'll go back to my PowerPoints. The project is a European funded project, so that's why you see the little logos appear at the bottom. That's a contractual obligation. It's co-financed by the Urban Innovative Action Fund, which finances experimental projects in different urban related topics. Our topic is housing. Yeah, and yeah, CALICO is just it's one of those experiments. It's also very, very interesting for us because it allows us to work with a wide partnership that has militant association, regional authorities, several different kind of structures that are not always easy to put around the table. I'm the project manager for this, so I know what I'm talking about. There's also a shared space at the bottom floor that will be open to the neighborhood. The idea is to integrate really the housing projects in the neighborhood and have local associations do activities in a shared space. We're like working with other medical facilities who might want to put an open space for people who are lonely or having maybe mental health issues to come and just have a chat and things like that. So trying to experiment with the community space. There is also a shared garden that will be shared by the commune. And have I said everything? There's a lot. Huh? There's also 2 Housing First units. For those who know about it, Housing First is a system to fix homelessness by providing housing first, and then using housing as a basis for people to get their life together. So there will be 2 units like this, and also a big first for us, there will be rental units dedicated to older people. The reason for that is that since we do homeownership, people have to get a mortgage, and even a social mortgage is very hard to acquire if you're above a certain age, usually above 50 years old. And so we will have 4 rental units for elderly. There's also a big innovation in a way that there will be a cooperative buying housing units to rent them on a community land trust land. So that's also very, very experimental. The way is to be able to mobilize private funding while still keeping the real estate outside of the private market. So yeah, very wide-ranging project. And another European project, which feeds into another of our objectives at the CLTB, which is to disseminate the community interest model for its transposable model. We transposed it from the US and from the UK, and it's been working well. It's the project SHICC for Sustainable Housing for Inclusive and Cohesive Cities. It's also a European funded project. It's a partnership between Brussels, Ghent, Lille in northern France, and London. And wait, because I have the Zoom video, so I don't know if I'm missing. No, okay. And it's running from 2017 to 2021. The idea is to support and disseminate community interests around Europe, so northwestern Europe. It's the part of the European funding. And through several things. So there's case studies, there are really practical guides on how to set up your own community and interest in your own city. There's social impact tools and a startup fund for associations that like to try to start a community interest in their own city. As you can see, the map on the left shows where the community interests are. So of course it's all over the UK because it's a long tradition there. Then there's quite a few in Belgium. There's quite a few in France, but I'd like to point out something about this. Like Verena said, that in Belgium the difficulty was to adapt the legal model. While in France there was no legal possibility to create what would be a community interest in the law. In Belgium they managed, because I think the way I understand it, there was a remnant of like a Dutch law, and then when the country became French, there was another law that was added, and so they were able to find a kind of legal construction based on that. But in France, it's actually a deputy, a French deputy that came to the community interest of Brussels, went to see how it worked, and then came back to France and created a law that allowed them to create CLTs. So it was pretty recently, but since it's became a public program, they've been sprawling all over the country, and they've been putting a lot together. But since it's a public program, most of the time, the community aspect is less prevalent than the one we have at the community interest of Brussels. And as you can see also on the map, these are direct results of the SHICC project. There are CLTs appearing in Amsterdam and in Berlin, and they have joined the partnership for the extension from 2020 to 2021. And yeah, that's it for the European project and for my presentation. I hope I was not too long.
Okay, fantastic. Really interesting. Yeah, and it sparked a whole load of stuff for me, very much, and it'd be good to sort of open up the conversation. And I'm going to be greedy. I'm going to ask the first question. I'm interested in, so the governance structure in terms of the CLT owns the land, and then you are all your schemes pretty much that people then buy their property as like a leasehold basis?
So the question is, how does it work?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can answer, Verena, if that's okay.
Yes. Yeah.
There's we actually give them a long-term lease, like 50 or 99 years, on what is called in Belgium a droit d'amphithéose, so like an amphitheosis right. I'm not sure. There's two rights actually that we lease. It's amphitheose and superficie. They give what I mean, like the bundle of rights of home ownership is within this. So it's like it works as if they own their homes, but it's actually a long-term lease.
Right.
Yeah.
So, anybody else got any comments? Want to ask questions? Open up the conversation. Thoughts?
The actual funding come from for the buildings? I know you buy the land, so where does the money come from for the buildings themselves?
Mostly publicly funded. So let's say we are now exploring other possibilities in terms of funding, but for the moment, the region really plays a big role, both in the life of the organization, let's say, so we are funded. The people that work in the organization are funded mostly by the region, and also in terms of acquiring the real estate properties, this is also greatly supported by the region for the moment. So yeah, this is a big opportunity, because in our countries that's not really the case. They have to rely on private donations or other, let's say, approaches, and we think this is a big opportunity. At the same time, there is also the desire to explore situations where the community land trust could be a little bit more autonomous in that sense. But yes, this is still in progress, let's say.
Yeah, but it's also worth of note that we're recognized as a social housing provider for the city of Brussels. So we have that that advantage.
Okay.
And it's a half financing by subsidies and half with the sale of the homes, which are sold way under market price.
Also,
I mean, not half exactly, but yeah. Yeah, go. Sorry.
We can also add something related to the fact that, in fact, when inhabitants have to do their loans, there is a special agreement, let's say, with an organization that is called Fonds du Logement. This organization will allow inhabitants to get loans in a very, let's say, how could I say, not really expensive loans. So they are still free to choose. They can still go to a bank, let's say, and have a regular loan at the conditions, at the market conditions. But this agreement with the Fonds du Logement, which is a regional actor, so again, it's a public actor, gives the possibility to inhabitants to get loans at easier conditions for them to fulfill. So again, the public support is really relevant.
Wow. So it's really about helping people to get on that property ladder in an affordable, open, inclusive way, and supported by the local government, by the city. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, we even managed to provide housing to people who are actually on unemployment benefits, who are like first generation immigrants. So we really like, and some of the people we've housed who are in that situation have found employment since. So we like to see it also as a very inclusive way of integrating a more marginalized population in the city.
Yeah, go on, Steve.
I don't know if I'm allowed to just jump in. I think, like, I'm not really sure if this is a question. I feel like there's a question in here somewhere. But I think that in England, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone else, but I feel like we don't have that kind of supported structure whereby anyone can, funding is one thing, but jumping on, for example, as a social housing provider is really, really, really hard. Like I'm training to become an architect, and I've done a lot of research into how I can provide social housing and kind of move into that sector. And we're blocked at every turn by framework agreements, which a lot of the time are kind of, so do you know what framework agreements are?
No.
It's basically where there's kind of like a register of people that the government have kind of okayed to use. So that might be contractors, builders, architects, suppliers. It's just basically a roster, like a big list of people that you're allowed to choose from. And if you're tendering a project and you've got like a ceiling cost, you'll tender it to like a number of providers within this framework agreement. And only if none of them can come back under the ceiling cost do you then go out to a public tender. And then if they can't meet the ceiling cost, they have to like relook at the project, because a lot of government projects, obviously you can't really overspend. But to get onto those framework agreements is a lot of red tape. You have to have done projects with other contractors that are already on those framework agreements, and it's like it's really, really, really hard, even though you're trying to provide social housing. And the government don't really like community land trusts. There's one really successful example in central London, in Kensington, called WECH. I can't remember what it stands for. Like, something Elgin and something, and they're a really wealthy community land trust who bought up the land back in the 80s and have the power to probably build sort of all over the UK with their current funds. But to do something like that now and in the north of England, I mean, what you guys have done is amazing. I'm so impressed, especially with you know, housing first is just incredible, and I'm trying to get. It's just amazing. It's such a good project. It's just so hard to do it here.
Yeah.
I don't really know what the question is, but
I can add that in terms of helping you like put a community interest together, or things such as how to come over these kind of obstacles, the SHICC project has a lot of UK participants. So I'm sure in the resources there are some guides or some contacts you can find. I'm not the manager for this project, so I cannot really orientate you extremely precisely, but I'd recommend Googling the SHICC project, SHICC. You'll find really a lot of resources. So maybe there's your case in there, yeah, or you can ask them how it's done.
But in fact, I think Paul knows Joaquin, so Joaquin is more involved in the project, and you can for sure contact Joaquin and yeah, ask for any sort of support. And,
yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, because it's a movement, so it really it's not the result of one organization or one entity. It was really a movement, and I think the situation in Brussels is so bad that the region finally decided to give a chance to this possibility, let's say, to address the housing question.
Yeah. Just before I bring in Steve and then Nick, I think Saskia, probably, in my view, and maybe I would say this, there's probably never been a better time in this country to look at setting up a community land trust. Steve's been on the board of the National Community Land Trust Network for a few years now, and I've just joined the board actually, but there's also now these hubs developing across the country. So we're just launching the Liverpool hub, probably one of the later hubs to get going, but the idea is to let people know that there is support there to get your project going. So wherever you are in the country, are you in Manchester?
Yeah, I'm in Manchester. I don't want to use the community hub in Manchester though. They've been nothing but difficult. Yeah,
so but we can talk about how we can maybe be a bit of that. But I do really believe this. I mean, I get a bit overexcited really sometimes, but I think right now the possibility of people taking charge of their own housing is probably quite high. And what we're calling for here in Liverpool is, just as Verena's talked about, is, you know, we need significant, we're asking our combined authorities to give us £3.6 million for a 4-year programme to support. You know, we launched that on Saturday as part of our charter, and that's the only way this is going to become embedded in our region. We can't just play around with this anymore. It's either embedded in how we do things or not, and we'll just wrap up in a couple of years and we give it a go, but actually, you know, it's got to be more than tinkering around the edges. I'm going to shut up and ask Steve to come in.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, great. Sometimes this mic doesn't work very well. I was going to ask timescales. You guys have obviously reached quite a scale now, and you've got a pipeline, and that's great. One of the issues we have in this country is that it takes a long time. So the average community-led housing development takes 7 years. So from someone wanting a house to someone getting a house is 7 years, and it's just painful, and a lot of people drop out, and there's so much red tape, as Saskia was saying. So I'm just wondering how long your first development took from concept to someone moving in, and now how long does your average project take?
The first project, Lenna, that I presented, took 8 to 9 years. So that was the first one. Then how long it takes now, it depends a lot. And I'm sorry, I'm going to correct Verena, but the Archie Labs actually don't involve the future inhabitants, but the other candidates on the list as a way to reduce the waiting time. Now the group is formed after the Archie Lab has been done and just before the construction works starts, indeed to reduce time before people move in the housing. So it's now between the time the group of future inhabitants is constituted and the moment they move in, it's the length of how long the building works take, and it could be, for example, for CALICO, it's 2 years, but it's also a bit specific. But we have to add the fact that there is a waiting list.
Exactly.
To be fair, and it really depends. As I said, there are categories. The highest category in demand is like the 2 poorest categories who want like a 3-bedroom house a lot of time because it's people with a lot of children. So people who are in that bracket may have to wait maybe 6-7 years, which is still a lot shorter than the social rental housing in Brussels, which is 10 years. Yeah, you have to wait 10 years in Brussels if you're on a social rental housing list. Yeah, it's pretty bad. But if you are on another bracket, for example, if you are a single mother who is on like the 2nd highest level of income, it's still under the social housing income ceiling, but you could get offered housing in 2 years because it's not a very common demographic that we have in our waiting list. Yeah, so it depends. It depends on the profile. It's a question we get asked all the time during the subscription information, like how long does it take? How long does it take? But we do our best.
Over to you, Nick.
Thanks. I was wondering if you could say a little more about the alternative funding strands that you're looking into. I ask because I'm a member and a co-founder of a fledgling community land trust in Southeast London, and we're hoping to create housing cooperatives, and we're looking into solidarity funds like we'd like to ask established housing cooperatives that have existed up to 40 years around the country, and also if we create housing co-ops, we were hoping to get them to have some kind of community levy to put into a pot to help buy more property. So I'm just wondering what other strands of funding you said you're looking at other options rather than relying on government grants.
Yeah, well, for the moment, it's mostly public, but we are working on a cooperative which has been recently established, and that should allow, let's say, really any sort of investor to invest. So this is going to be the alternative, let's say, approach. We are trying to maintain the same principles of the community land trust, so the division of land ownership from the built assets. But in terms of resources and financial assets, this is going to be really about investing in a cooperative, and so this could be for private investors, for individuals, for foundations, for anybody that is interested, let's say. But let's say this is a recently created organization within which the community land trust is involved, but is not the only one member of this cooperative. So as part of this cooperative, there are a number of other organizations in Brussels that of course share the same philosophy and the same understanding on how to address this issue of housing and dealing not only housing but in general the rising costs of land in Brussels. But yes, again, it's not the only the community land trust in this case.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just build on that a little bit? A couple more other questions. Sort of what sort of numbers of properties do you have? And also, does the city council, or however it works, give you land? Are they supporting in that way as well?
Well, so for concerning land, a very useful situation, let's say, to acquire land for the community land trust is what we call the neighborhood contracts, which create, let's say, give the possibility to access land at very favorable conditions. So at the cost that is really affordable and allows really to acquire land.
It's in neighborhoods that they try to revitalize, so they're like the contrat de quartier.
What?
It's in lands that where they're trying to revitalize a neighborhood, and
Yes.
like there we can access lands.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there is still a major problem, let's say, that is related to the actual land availability in the region of Brussels. So we have an administrative, let's say, limitation that impedes the region to expand beyond the administrative borders. And of course, this is going to reduce the possibilities to acquire land within the region. But then, of course, for example, the region can also offer land. The first project that Arthur explained, the project Lenna, was actually realized because of a parish donation. They donated actually the building, and it was a renovation project, as you have seen. So there is always the possibility also to give directly land or real estate assets in general. That's also an option. But indeed, the availability, the physical availability of land within the limits of the region is a big, let's say, obstacle for the moment. Yeah.
And how many numbers of properties do you have?
Oh yeah, how many do we have, Arthur? I'm not really
I
sure.
think we have 11 right now. Overall, we have 11 projects,
yeah.
out of which 3 or 4 are inhabited. It's I mean, we're reaching like cruise, you know, like speed, I guess, more or less. I don't know if you say that in English, but like yeah, normal working speed, but it's still very slow. We have maybe 100 inhabitants as of now. But as Verena said, we're very limited by what is called the Belgian institutional lasagna, which means that the Brussels urban area is actually something like 3.5 million people, but the administrative authority is over 1 million, a bit over 1 million maybe. So we cannot expand beyond that, and I mean, the CLTB is also an answer to rising price of land. Since the price of land is rising, it's very expensive even for us. But as Verena said, there are opportunities like the neighborhood contracts and things like that, where we try to like fit in, try to lobby the right politician, try to get really into cheap land opportunities. Yeah, but it's not easy. It's just really not easy, and I can imagine that in London, for example, it would be impossible.
One more thing to complete what Arthur said is that for this reason, also given the morphology of the region of Brussels and the land available, the projects are still very small scale. So I guess the maximum number of housing units is 32, if I'm not wrong, 32 or 33, something like that, right?
You mean overall or inhabitants?
No, for every project, the maximum number of housing units is around 32, 33.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's possible, yeah.
Yeah, for the same reason, which on the other hand is also something interesting to think about when we want to, as I was explaining, when we are doing this effort of building communities as well. So as soon as the scale will grow, this will raise a few questions concerning the possibility to really build the sense of community and be effective also in the participatory process that we are going to organize. So we are growing as well. The approach is going to change in evolution with the scale of the projects and the scaling of the organization, let's say.
Okay, does anybody have any last thoughts or comments? Or go on, Nick.
I just wanted to ask, are you volunteers or you get paid?
We are paid, but there are also volunteers.
Well, you get paid. No, we're paid. We're a team of 20 people, and we have 3 trainees. The rest is either architects, social workers.
Frozen.
Yeah.
And is that funded through the local authority?
Yes, yes, yeah. So just one thing we probably said very quickly was said, I think, in the video as well. So the organization is divided in two legal, let's say, actors. So you have a foundation, and the foundation is the one in charge of acquiring real estate assets and developing them. And then you have the organization, the Community Land Trust organization, which is the team. So it's us and it's everybody organizing the workflow and the relationship with the community and any activity, let's say, related to the final delivery of the projects. But so we have it is this double structure, in fact, that allowed to realize the philosophy of the trust, which is at the core of the Community Land Trust in the US, but it was not possible to realize in the same, let's say, direct way in a civil law country, because we are under a different legal regime, let's say. So we had to find another way, and this is how we did it.
Fantastic. I mean, it's really given me a lot to think about.
I'm happy.
That model that you talk about is really interesting, and we're at a very interesting point here in Liverpool.
We can send you. We recently wrote a paper for a project with the UN Habitat, and it contains more information also about financial aspects and so on that can be interesting for all of you. So if you want, we can share this paper for you or send you the link, and you can have a look. It contains really a lot of detailed information about that.
Fantastic.
Sorry, my computer crashed.
Can happen.
Right, well, that's a great start to a Friday with blue skies here in Liverpool. That really was really helpful, and yeah, it's definitely opened my mind a bit to how we should move forward here in our region. So I really want to thank you, Verena and Arthur, for that presentation. It was really great. Yeah, really inspiring and interesting for us. So I really appreciate your time this morning, and let's build the connections as well.
Of course. Yes, as we said, this is a movement, so the more we are, the better.
And we're still part of Europe. Liverpool's
yes.
We're part of Europe.
Of course you are. Yes, so there is a history, you cannot just forget that.
So thank you very much, everybody. Oh,
thanks to you for involving us.
I'm sorry, could I just ask a really quick question? Do either of you have anything to do with Housing Europe in Brussels?
They're a partner in most of our European projects, yeah.
They're amazing.
Yeah, yeah, they're pretty nice.
Yeah, you're right, it is a movement, and I think being involved with them is like what we need to do. We need to get involved in housing. England needs to be part of Housing 2030. Yeah, amazing.
Okay. So thank you very much. We've got a few
Thanks to you
today, but I really appreciate that European perspective. It's been fantastic. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.